And ladies and gentlemen, we are live. It is a beautiful Monday evening, November 22nd, 2021. This is the Voice of Reason podcast. My name is Sean Phillips, and as always, I am joined alongside my co-host, Mr. Andy Van Beber. And tonight we have a very special guest, the one, the only, Mr. Alex Ellison. Alex is a prosecuting attorney for Pike County right here in Missouri. Alex, how are you doing this evening?
I'm great. Thank you very much for having me.
We're glad.
Now, we are exceptionally honored to have you on. We know that you're a fan of the show from time to time, so we're glad we can pull you on. We're sorry that we're not, like something cool like the Pat McAfee show or Joe Rogan podcast.
Yeah, I mean, we're not Joe Rogan up in here, so we're not going to be able to, get you all the national attention for your presidential run or anything. But we'll do our best.
Yeah, I consider Sean to be the Joe Rogan of Whiteside.
Hey, yeah, well,
yeah.
I don't smoke as much dope as all the other fellas out there in Whiteside, but
oh my gosh,
that's neither here nor there. So yeah, when is the Alex Ellison presidential bid gonna come up? What kind of timeline are we looking at for you?
I don't think there's going to be such a thing. I'm pretty darn happy with what I'm doing right now.
Well, tell us a little bit about how you came to be Pike County prosecuting attorney. Just give us a little bit of background about that, if you would, please.
Yeah, sure. So I graduated from Clopton in 2009. Then I went to the University of Missouri St. Louis, where I graduated in 2012 with a bachelor's in political science. And I kind of always knew that I wanted to go to law school. So I immediately went to law school at the University of Missouri in Columbia. I graduated from there in 2015. I actually got my first job as a lawyer in doing private practice as a criminal defense lawyer and a family law lawyer in Bowling Green for a small firm. Definitely didn't think I was going to be a prosecutor. I tended to think of myself as more of a almost an anti-government type person. But I did not enjoy what I was doing. Felt like I needed something that was a bit of a higher calling. An assistant prosecutor job opened up in Bowling Green with Pike County. I jumped on it. Worked for a great lawyer named Mark Fisher for a couple of years, who was the prosecutor, taught me a lot. And then in 2018, he moved on to something else. And I ran for the big job of prosecuting attorney. And then, yeah, I've been doing that ever since. I'm quick plug. I am up for re-election next year in 2022.
Awesome.
Plug away.
November 2022, if you live in Pike County. I really like my job, and I think I've done a pretty good job at it. So come out and vote for me.
That's right.
But
maybe we'll have you on again when it gets close to election time, and we'll give you some more plugs.
We 100% will have you back on during re-election time. That'd be awesome. Yeah.
Thank you.
So some of the stuff that we have a few issues that we talk about. I know the big thing that we're wanting to kind of get in and touch on. There's a couple issues, and we'll get to hopefully the NFL case. Sean, I know Sean's jumping at that, but as of this week, what day was that, Sean? Was that Tuesday, Wednesday? Wednesday, or I can't remember what day that verdict came out, but.
Well, it's today, the 22nd. So
yeah, I think it was Friday.
Friday.
I think it was the 19th. Yeah.
So Kyle Rittenhouse, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the case, Kyle Rittenhouse was at the time he was a 17-year-old young man from northern Illinois, and he I'll bring up a picture over here on the side tab here. So this young man right here, Kyle Rittenhouse, he was cleared of all the charges. This guy, what he did was he went to Kenosha after the shooting. What was the name?
Jacob Blake.
Jacob Blake, who was a man who was shot in the back by the police, and people were protesting, and Kyle came. He drove. It was 30 minutes from his house, from what I understand, and while he was out, he killed two men who were apparently he felt threatened by him or whatever, and then he wounded a third man, and I'm kind of, what the left and the right are kind of doing with this case, and we'll start with that, I guess, and go from there. And this is what I'm thinking. You guys jump in at any time. The right is looking at this as a right to stand your ground, or the stand your ground law kind of thing, self defense, right to bear arms case, whereas the left is looking at it as vigilantism and a gun control issue. What do you, Sean? What are your, before we get into this, what are your initial thoughts as far as what this case was really about?
Sure. So Kyle Rittenhouse kind of reminds me of a lot of some of the people that I know, either my age, maybe a couple years older, and then definitely younger as well, that are very much kind of those through and through Bible trumpers, who are kind of, want to do everything for America but serve it in one shape or another, and not just like in the armed forces, just like doing a difference and making a real difference in your community. And so when this happened, right, it was Kyle Rittenhouse had done what tons and tons and tons of people I know said they wanted to do: go out armed and kill a protester. I'd heard it 100 times. I'd even heard it from people that I was in the guard with. That if we weren't working these protests like this, I'd be out there, doing this, that, or the other. And so the situation as everything broke down, the media did a very good job of painting Kyle Rittenhouse as this animal that went out there and from the get-go had kind of started stuff and ended up killing people. And then as the case went on, as more evidence came out, we know that was not necessarily the case, at least by the law. There were a couple things that really did confuse me, and that's why I'm so glad that Alex is actually here, that he can maybe explain why the judge did some of the things that the judge did. I thought it was very weird. I remember right off the bat, again, and this could just be me not understanding why, but the judge from the get-go not letting prosecutors call the people that Kyle killed victims was something that I don't know how common stuff like that is in a courtroom. Is that something that you kind of see a lot, Alex?
Yeah, that is actually a pretty common thing during criminal trials. And, we've had judges give almost that exact same ruling before. Now, I will say, in general, trial judges are given wide latitude and discretion in making sort of those courtroom rules for a trial. For the most part, appeals courts aren't going to touch the authority of a trial judge if someone appeals that. But yeah, making an order saying you can't call the people that were killed by Rittenhouse victims, that's pretty common. I'll tell you, this summer I tried a murder case, and the defendant took the stand, and during that cross-examination, I purposefully, but I asked the question of the defendant, isn't this the gun you murdered your stepson with? And that got a big objection from the defense attorney. And he said, Judge, he can't say he murdered his stepson. That's what we're here over. We're here for the jury to decide whether it was murder. And I think the same kind of goes for these alleged victims in the Rittenhouse case. Is if this was truly done in self-defense, they're not victims. They're just unfortunately people who were killed. And so I think I get that. And then I know that the judge also allowed the defense to refer to them as rioters or looters. And that I do find a little surprising, because I find being able to call them such things are a little bit, that would be a little bit prejudicial, maybe influencing the jury's opinion of those,
especially
people.
If they weren't rioting or looting during the time that everything happened.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, I'm not familiar with every single piece of evidence in this case, so maybe there was some evidence that they were contemporaneously involved in those riots, but no, as far as making rules like that about what you can call actors or characters in this case, that's very, very common.
I think
So,
oh, go ahead, Sean.
No, go ahead, V.
I was just going to say, as we were talking about some of these people, the first one they talked about I read about was Joseph Rosenbaum. This was a guy who said this was actually a guy who had recently gotten out of jail, but he was straightening he's trying to straighten his life out, and he actually but when they see him they show him in the videos, this is the first guy I believe that Kyle Rittenhouse had shot at. It said that the video showed Rosenbaum throwing the plastic bag at Rittenhouse. His fiance testified that Rosenbaum had just been discharged from a hospital in Milwaukee, was carrying paper, socks, deodorant, toothbrush, and toothpaste in a plastic bag, and she couldn't answer why he was there. The second guy that they had talked about was Anthony Huber, who was in a crowd of protesters with his girlfriend. He had just turned 26 a few days earlier. And after he had shot the first guy, this other guy, Huber, had come at him with, I guess, a skateboard, and attempted to because he was acting in reaction to what happened to the other guy. And then the third guy that they mentioned was Gage Grosskreutz, and this is the guy that they've really, there's a lot of questions I have about this guy. He was there as supposedly as a paramedic, and they said that he drew his pistol on Kyle Rittenhouse, and Kyle Rittenhouse was acting in self-defense against this guy. But this guy, his testimony was that everybody was pointing at Rittenhouse as, this is the guy who was doing the shooting, and this guy was actually, I guess, doing some first aid on somebody else. And when so there is
every person that went there allegedly went as a medic is what,
and that's the other thing too. Everybody had a story, I think, as to, well, we were just, even Kyle Rittenhouse, we were all justified to be there, and I don't know go ahead, Sean.
So Alex, so I know that, like, I'm not 100% familiar, but I have the understanding that in a lot of court cases, and my understanding is that just because some things, for example, the judge threw out a piece of evidence at the very beginning of this case, stating that it could not be admissible as evidence in this case because it didn't connect in correlation with the events that happened in Kenosha, which the evidence that was brought forth was a video. It was like a Snapchat or something was shared where Kyle Rittenhouse was in a vehicle with another individual, and they were recording individuals loading items from a store into their vehicle, and they claimed that they were looting. I don't think that was confirmed. That's just what they thought that they were doing, was stealing stuff from a store. And Kyle Rittenhouse said, if I had my AR, I'd start shooting at them. I would start shooting at them right now, but I don't have my rifle. And so why would a piece of evidence like that necessarily be thrown out in a case like this where he ended up doing said thing? Is it just because of circumstance, or just wasn't that same day?
So obviously I'd be commenting on a case that deals with Wisconsin state law. I'm only familiar with Missouri state law, but most of the states are pretty similar. My guess is in Missouri, we have a prohibition against what we call propensity evidence, which means if there's some evidence that you've done something in the past that's similar to the crime you're accused of committing, I, as the prosecution, can't, like, let's say, for example, you are a known car thief. You just go around and you pop door handles until you find one that's open, and you like to take cars. If I'm trying you for a theft that occurred in August of 2020, I can't tell the jury about the 19 cars you've stolen previously over the course of your life, because just because you've committed a similar type of crime in the past, or in this case, not that it was a crime for Rittenhouse to say that, just because you've said something similar in the past, that really doesn't have a causal connection to, well, did you do it this time?
Sure.
And so the judge, I'm sure, was trying to balance that. And it obviously is prejudicial. It does paint a personal picture of Kyle Rittenhouse that a jury could hold against him. And finally, I'll say, in general, in criminal cases like this, judges tend to err on if it's a close call, most of the time they're gonna err on the side of the defendant, because one, it's the state's burden to prove the case, but two, if a defendant is acquitted, that case is not appealable. So now, from this case, all of the judge's decisions from this case, they can't be appealed. Prosecution can't appeal it because double jeopardy applies here, and Kyle can't be charged again or tried over again. Now, but at the same time, if Kyle were to be found guilty, now the judge has taken one less thing away that Kyle could have potentially appealed over. If the judge had let that evidence come in, that would have been an automatic issue that Kyle could have appealed the case on. So,
gotcha.
So now what we're hearing about now, Alex, is the possibility of civil suits. Where and how can this affect him? What kind of things can they go after in these civil suits?
I mean, yeah, he's definitely, I think, going to have some trouble defending some civil suits here, because one thing to keep in mind is in a criminal case, the burden of proof is much higher. The state must prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, which I tend to tell people pretty much I've got to convince a jury at 95% that this crime was committed. In a civil case, the burden is a preponderance of the evidence, which just means that you believe it's more likely than not. So 51% convinced. And so one, burden of proof is much lower. Two, there's a lot more leeway in what evidence comes in a civil case, especially because both sides can appeal a verdict in a civil case. But three, I would imagine they're going to be going after, I don't know what kind of civil or what kind of financial assets he has. I'm betting not much at 18. But I guarantee you he's probably about to make bank off of this for the next few years. He's going to get speaking engagements. He's probably going to get a book deal, might get a podcast.
I hope not.
Who knows what he'll get. Yeah. And, so there might actually be some money there that the families of these victims can go after. Now, I don't know whether that'll be successful. But yeah, just because he was acquitted in the criminal case doesn't mean that he is protected in the civil case, as we saw with OJ.
Right.
OJ was acquitted.
That's exactly what I was about to bring in. Yeah.
Yep.
But then his victims' families sued him and got millions and millions of dollars.
So before we get too much more into this, I want to go back to the video aspect. One of our listeners asked if we watched the videos, how much. I mean, the thing that I think some people have to look at is this case was it self-defense or was it murder? And so before we talk about the video itself, where is the line? I mean, how thin is, I'm sure it is very thin, but how thin is that line between self-defense and murder? I mean, what kind of line is the prosecution going to have to look at, or where did they fail at in that, maybe even?
Yeah. So in looking at this case, I went back and because I told you I tried a murder case this summer, and the issue in that case was self-defense, and it involved a gun. So I went back and looked at our jury instruction for self-defense from that case. And in Missouri and Wisconsin's jury instruction that they used in this case is very similar. But essentially, self-defense, the law on self-defense is what would a reasonable person, and so not necessarily what would Kyle Rittenhouse do, but what would a reasonable person feel is a justifiable amount of force to use in this situation. And so if you're in reasonable fear of imminent physical harm, you're allowed to use whatever force it takes necessary to stop that imminent threat. And, you know, in a case like this, I mean, I'll just be honest. I didn't, of course, I'm not familiar with all of the evidence, and I hate to comment on other prosecutors, but I do think the case was probably overcharged.
Agreed. 100% agreed.
I kind of thought during the trial, the prosecutor was almost trying to make Rittenhouse out to be like some sort of serial killer that was hunting people down. And I don't think the evidence supported that. And I think he paid the price with the jury because I think he overpromised what he was going to prove. And so in a case like this, I think he should have focused much more on how reckless Kyle was being. If he wanted a shot at, I'm still not sure that would have been successful, but I think that was his only option, and he just overcharged it.
Well, that's so I compared it a lot to, and some people tried saying that they were polar opposite, but people just weren't understanding what I was getting at. I compared this case a lot to the case of Casey Anthony. And the sole reason was obviously the situations are very different. However, in this case, where they're very similar was the prosecution itself aimed too high. So with the Casey Anthony case in Florida, the prosecution tried to do everything they can to everything they could to punish Casey to the fullest extent of the law, which required them to try her for first-degree murder. The issue was there was not evidence for first-degree murder. There was no premeditated evidence that they had. Well, they had a little bit, but then they didn't understand the difference between Internet Explorer and Firefox and didn't know that there were two different search engines that you could use to look up foolproof strangulation. But it was the same thing with Rittenhouse. If I'm not mistaken, they tried to charge him for first-degree reckless homicide.
I've got that right.
Which,
here, Sean,
again,
the thing they said.
Go on.
So what we have are first-degree intentional homicide, attempted first-degree intentional homicide, first-degree reckless homicide, first-degree recklessly endangering safety, and first-degree recklessly endangering safety. So in looking at those, I mean, so when we're saying overcharged, I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think it was overcharged. I mean, because ultimately what prosecutors or really just trial attorneys in general look at when we take a case to trial, we are putting on a show for those 12 jurors. And it's our job to make sure that the evidence we have is going to back up our charges because, you know, jurors aren't computer programs. They have emotions and they have gut feelings about things. And if the prosecution comes out and promises something too much, even if you offer, you know, like in this case, I know they offered jury instructions for the lesser included offenses so that the jury could have given him a conviction for some sort of reckless homicide, even on those intentional charges. But the problem is when you make your whole case about how intentional these killings were, it makes it kind of it's hard for the jury to take you seriously when you turn around and say, okay, we know we spent all of this trial telling you that this was an intentional homicide, but you should also consider reckless homicide just in case you don't agree. That doesn't really fly with the jury. And so I do think it was overcharged. And I think the prosecutor would have been much better focusing more on the fact of why is this kid even here in the first place? Right. He's obviously looking for a fight. Even if he didn't go there, with the intent to kill people, he put himself in a really bad situation and did nothing to cool the situation
and
off.
that's one of the questions. We have a few questions here for you, Alex. One of our first questions was, why did he feel that it was his business to be in the streets in the first place? I mean, isn't I can see where the intentional he had no seven. First of all, a 17-year-old, and I'm sorry, I'm going to say this, it probably offends some of the, but a 17-year-old child with a rifle. I mean, wouldn't there be grounds for even saying something, charging his mother with like, hey, this is still a minor, and a 17 years old. I mean, is there any grounds for that even, or to go after her?
I mean, it could be, and I don't know, Wisconsin's statutes on that. In Missouri, it probably wouldn't be any sort of charge, just because at least here it's not illegal for a 17-year-old to possess a firearm. It's not illegal for a 17-year-old to carry that firearm in public or go to a protest and watch. And at some point there is a matter of degree with parental responsibility. I mean, it's a whole heck of a, if this was an 11-year-old out there, I think it would be a little more understandable, but a 17-year-old, it's not exactly the easiest. If their mind is set on something, it's not easy to stop them.
Mm-hmm.
But
another question we had there was, is Wisconsin a model penal code state?
I do not know.
I'm not aware of that either.
Yeah.
Then we had another question that said, didn't they prosecute him with all charges within 48 hours of the incident, or is that normal, or is that too fast?
I mean, that's pretty normal, especially on a serious case like this. Some cases it may take, like when I get a case referred to me from law enforcement, sometimes it may take months or even a couple years before I get to charge it, depending on more investigation that needs to take place. But frequently, all the time, we charge people within 24 hours, especially if there's somebody that we feel needs to be held for a safety reason. Because the police can't just hold somebody indefinitely. They need to have charges filed against them. Mm-hmm. So, in a case like this where you're alleging murder, I think charging within 48 hours is pretty reasonable.
So, in your personal opinion, I'll ask one more question. I've been asking a lot. I'll let Sean, I'm sorry, but where do you, other than overcharge, obviously we said overcharging is one thing. What's another area where you think the prosecutor probably maybe, and I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but what's another area where the prosecutor what's a different direction he could have took, or something different he could have done that would have been more effective than what he did?
Yeah. I mean, as far as a different strategy, I'm not sure, but I will say, I don't think the prosecution was prepared for Kyle to do as well as he did on the stand. I thought Kyle Rittenhouse was one of the best prepared witnesses, at least defendants, who took the stand in their own case that I've seen. And I don't think the prosecution expected that. I don't think they expected him to break down in tears on the stand like he did. Whether they were real or not, I'm not sure, but I thought it was very effective. His testimony was. But one other thing, and this is more of a style thing than anything else, I think they ticked that judge off too much. And I don't say that because I don't think it would have resulted in the judge being more favorable to them with some of those rulings. But the problem is, like I said, you're putting on a show for the jury. And every time that judge rolls his eyes at the prosecutor or snap back at him or demeaned him in some way, the jury sees that. And in that courtroom, the judge is like God, and the jurors look to the judge for guidance. And if the judge isn't happy with you, that's going to rub off on those jurors. And I'm afraid that might have happened in this case.
What do we know, Sean? Do we know much about this judge or anything, or anything about this guy?
As far as him, No, I couldn't tell you much about him. I can say I'm thankful that he was not the judge in the Ahmaud Arbery case.
Right.
That's going on right now. I think that this is actually a prime example of two polar opposite personalities of judges that are being involved in cases. There's a few things that I'm still really confused on. One of the big ones was the dismissal of the weapons charge
Yes.
against
Yes.
Kyle. That after going through and looking through the law, the language of the law, this is where it's getting really confusing to me. And one thing that I'm seeing a lot more people that lean real right, and it's kind of corny. It's actually really corny and awkward, weird that people are on like that are real hard on that thump the dump Trump train are like claiming this as the biggest victory of all time. This is not. I just don't think that this is the case. Y'all should be riling around, but the language of these kind of laws that are quite literally meant to be open for interpretation are about to get really tightened down. Because reading through this law in Wisconsin, again, that this differs from Missouri, in Wisconsin, a 17-year-old cannot possess a firearm without supervision unless they're going to hunt. Okay,
Or
and that is where, or on a gun range, which neither was the case. Now, I had read in an article, I want to say it was the New York Times, that allegedly the weapon had allegedly been in Kenosha, where his father is from, or grandfather,
right.
one of the two. For hunting purposes, but it wasn't used for hunting, and he was unsupervised when this happened. So the fact that the judge threw that sole charge, after that happened, at that point I knew that he was going to be cleared of all charges. Because at least me personally, when I saw the judge dismiss that charge, it kind of just set the precedents for the jurors to kind of just roll with this case. Because Kyle Rittenhouse is the kind of guy we see all over. And I agree with you, Alex. He was coached very, very well. This kid went from being in bars wearing a free as fuck shirt, taking photos with everybody that he could, thumbs up, smiling, laughing, high-fiving about the case, getting drunk in Wisconsin and Illinois at 18 at these bars because people were buying him rounds of shots because they were so proud of him for what he did, to then crying on the stand. He was coached extremely well. And you see guys like him all the time, the ones that will go out nagging people on to pick a fight, which is exactly what I believe. Because again, there's so much in between that we will never know. It will always just be grain of salt, but there are so many people like him that you would see antagonizing. It's the same thing that we see in Seattle. And I'm not going to act and say that, it's just right versus left, because we know there's people that are like in Antifa that instigate, and they try to bite the hand that feeds you. And so it's just weird. We need to stop pretending that he's a good guy. It was the same thing with the George Floyd protest. Okay. George Floyd was not a perfect citizen. He had his errors, he had his flaws, and we need to accept that he had his errors and his flaws. And I think it's the same thing for an individual like Kyle, understanding, yes, while you are not guilty of reckless first degree murder, you're still a scumbag. I think we can, I at least think that should be agreed upon. But with
I feel if I can say something real quick on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is where the polarizing effect is, and because we have a very, I'm proud of this, that we have a diverse audience. But we have and I've been watching some of the comments on our feed here. We have some people who say, well, justice was done. And then I have other people who say he killed people in the streets. I mean, and so I as an educator, somebody who's worked with teenagers, just like, and you described it perfectly, Sean. I've known of students who fit this profile of somebody who wants to do everything. I think the way you said it earlier, wants to do everything except serve in the military. You know, whether it's to go out and to, well, I'll stand guard and I'll do this and I'll do that. And I don't know if it's just some sense of bravado or what it is that
I totally think it is. Because the issue, again, that we're going to see regardless, the next time we have protests, the next time we have anything, you're going to see an influx of individuals thinking that it's their turn to be the next Kyle Rittenhouse. And these kinds of things are going to become more and more common, and they're going to become more and more deadly. Like, I don't know if you guys remember, this was when, oh gosh, I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on the individual that was killed by police in St. Louis that sparked all the protests. It was after Trayvon Martin.
Michael Brown?
Michael Brown, after the Michael Brown killings. I remember very specifically, again, rumor mill, because it's all just, word of mouth. There was all these rumors that people from the city were going to come down to Pike County and come down to Troy Walmart. I remember it was very specifically Troy Walmart was people from St. Louis, the hood of St. Louis, were going to come down to Troy Walmart to cause trouble. Okay. That was never going to happen. But what did happen? Tons of people loaded up in trucks with weapons and pulled into the Troy Walmart parking lot, getting ready for it. Okay. So imagine what we'd be looking at if, let's say, an individual went there and there might have been a mistake for what they were doing there, and then a shootout would have ensued. You're going to see these kinds of things go on more and more. And I was looking through some of these comments. As far as like watching the videos, yes, I've watched a ton of them. And I think that's just why me personally, this Kyle Rittenhouse case annoyed me and frustrates me at the level that it is because as a guard soldier that's worked protest, okay, and I've been there. I've been there on the front lines. I've had water bottles thrown at me. I've seen weapons in people's waistlines as they're threatening to say they're going to kill us and do all this. Let us do our job. Let us do our job. It is not your job to take responsibility into your 17-year-old hands. It's not your job to be a vigilante. And because he decided to do so, 2 people are dead. And now did Kyle use self-defense? Absolutely. I genuinely believe he did. But do I think that he poked the bear? Yeah. I do think he did.
Alex, what do you think this says for, and we've talked about this a little bit already, what do you think this says for each side? What is this, what do you feel that this verdict means for both gun rights and for the other, I mean, for those who are for more control and against vigilance? I mean, what kind of precedents, and Sean mentioned precedents, what kind of precedents do you feel that this verdict is going to set for future cases, future events?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see Sean's point about how this could embolden people to go out and, maybe, I guess what you could call counter protest with firearms. But, I will say, and it may be a pipe dream of mine, because it is probably at this point in our nation's political, I guess, lifespan to separate politics from the courtroom. But I do wish people would take a step back and realize that, what happened in that courtroom in Kenosha with Kyle Rittenhouse is only about Kyle Rittenhouse. it shouldn't be a lesson to anybody on either side. I don't think it's a barometer for which way the country's going when it comes to gun rights, one way or the other. These trials are very fact specific. They're only about, and even then, it's only about the facts that the jury hears. It's not about what's on YouTube or what's been played on CNN over and over again. It's only what those 12 people in that courtroom saw and heard during the trial. Now, I would love it if, as the old saying goes, you can wish in one hand and crap in the other, see which one fills up first. I would love it if we as a nation could separate these criminal trials from politics, but I don't know that that's going to happen. I will say in this case, it is in my opinion, it's a really close call as to whether this was truly self-defense or whether this was some sort of reckless killing.
Well, I was reminded as I was reading for one of the cases, and I remember I've taught this in class before. One of the cases that they brought up as a comparison case was the Shepard versus Maxwell case. And this was a case back, I believe, in the 60s I think it was a Cincinnati doctor, Dr. Samuel Shepard, and they actually made a movie called The Fugitive based upon this case. And they were afraid and this was in the 60s before social media and YouTube and everything else. They were afraid, and Samuel Shepard obviously was convicted, but he appealed on the grounds that the media had overblown this case. And in this, I guess I'm kind of going a different direction here, but my concern for this case and any other high priority case that follows is how is it that we look at the life and the rights of one young man, even if he, dirtbag, good kid, bad kid, whatever he is. I mean, don't you think that and in future cases that rights of people are going to be severely threatened by media coverage, overblown media coverage, 24-hour news cycle? I mean, is that something that we should be more concerned about or getting into as we go further on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about it this way. If in 1930, it was, if a crime was committed in Pike County, and let's say it was a sensational crime, it would be pretty easy to move that case to, even an adjoining county. You might be able to move it to Lincoln County, and nobody in Lincoln County has heard about what happened. But nowadays, that's pretty much impossible with social media and the 24-hour news cycle. But it's even more so when you have a case like this that grabs the national attention. You can't move a case that happens in Wisconsin out of Wisconsin to another state. That's not going to happen. But even if you could, I don't know that you could find a corner of this country where most of the jury didn't know something about this case. And I do think that's a problem, because even if you sequester a jury during the trial, hoping that they, and you take away their phones and you don't let them have access to television, have they been living under a rock for the last 9 months while this all has been going on? And yeah, potentially. I mean, I think absolutely. If Kyle Rittenhouse had been found guilty here, there's a definite claim that the defense could have made, whether it would have been a successful appeal or not, but there's a definite claim that Kyle was prejudged by the media, and the media fed into whatever the verdict ended up being. And so I do think that there is a serious risk of that getting worse and worse as time goes on, because it doesn't seem like information spreading is slowing down. It just seems like we're all consuming much more media and information as time goes on. And eventually it's going to be impossible to find a jury that's impartial.
Yeah. And that's the thing.
Man,
yeah, go ahead, Sean.
Well, I was just going to say that's a well-spoken man. I think he would make a mighty fine prosecuting attorney for the Pike County District.
Yeah.
Before too long.
One of our listeners did write in, and we want to thank Tammy for she did say that she actually grew up in Kenosha, and she said it was the most laid back place to live. And now she said Racine, that was a bad area. She said when she was in 4th grade, it was awful scary. When you look at that part of the country too, and I wonder if how tough the prosecuting attorney's job was in that case, because being in a Midwest town, and I believe that was I'm almost sure that was a red state in the last election, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure. But
I think it flipped back to red.
yeah,
I think it was blue and went back to red.
it's a battleground state. It's safe to say, I think. But I mean, I think it would be awfully difficult. And I mean, Kenosha is not just like this mega metropolis. I mean, I think the cards were laid against the prosecuting attorney from the get go, because it was, you are in a more rural area. You are in. So I mean, how hard is that? In your job, Alex, how hard is that to find a truly impartial jury?
Yeah, I mean, finding an impartial jury is definitely tough. I think we all want to assume the best of ourselves, and we as potential jurors want to assume that we could go into a trial with an open mind, and just because we've heard something about the case, or maybe we know one of the attorneys, or we know the defendant, we would be able to put that aside and judge solely based on the facts. But humans are human, and we bring our presuppositions into court with us. Like for example, in my trials in Pike County, one of the questions I always ask during jury selection is, who here knows me? And out of a jury of, let's say, or a jury pool of, let's say, 75 people, I usually get about 30 or 35 people that say they know me in some fashion. And at that point, it's less about, because we can't just eliminate all of those people. It's more about weeding out, okay, can you put that aside and judge the case based solely on the facts? That's in a case like this, that's even tougher to find because of the media coverage. But you hit on another point, and I really wanted to address that as far as the pressure that was put on this prosecutor. There is no doubt that prosecutor probably felt like he was between a rock and a hard place when making this charging decision. If he doesn't charge that case last summer when it happens, I think undoubtedly there are way bigger riots than what are going on right now. Way bigger protests, and he is in hot water, and he becomes probably a national pariah. It would be, I think we all assume the best of ourselves. I certainly want to hope that if I was put in that position, I would make the right decision, whatever it is, whether it's to charge or not to charge. But again, we're all humans and subject to political pressure. I deal with it every day when I have victims of crimes, and definitely probably the toughest meetings I have are meeting with victims and telling them, I'm sorry. I believe you. I believe that this happened, but I don't think there's enough evidence that I can convince a jury that this happened. And so I'm not going to be able to file this charge. And that's tough to tell people. But sometimes it's just a necessary thing, and you just got to put your big boy pants on and do it. And I think that prosecutor, it seemed to me like he believed that Kyle Rittenhouse was guilty. So I don't think he caved to the political pressure, but I don't think you can deny that there was pressure on him when he made this decision.
I think the biggest thing that we've seen over and over and over again with a lot of, and I see this same statement being made, and Sean and I actually discussed this last week in the beginning of our podcast, was that the a lot of the witnesses, I won't say half, but a number of the witnesses that the prosecuting attorney called end up being better witnesses for the defense than for the prosecution. I mean, I forgot what the guy who said he was a paramedic, which guy that was, the guy who had basically half of his arm blown off.
Yeah, I think that was Gross Cutes.
Yeah, Gross Cutes, right. And I mean, that guy, I thought that he, a lot of people try to paint him up as a guy who was, but when I forgot what the key statement was that he said, though, is basically at the point, though, when he said, I I felt threatened until, I had my finger on the trigger and everything else like that. And I'm like, okay, you just basically to me just said you're threatening, whose life is more important, you know? And it became, and they made this guy I was watching, Ben, the Jewish commentator with
Shapiro.
yeah, Ben Shapiro. I was watching Ben Shapiro's podcast this week, and he basically, he was just laying out Gage Grosskreutz like it was nobody's business, and I was like, well, that's not really fair, because now what you're doing is you're comparing life for life, you know. Okay, so whose life is more at stake here? Is it the guy who's, who cares what, and it's like what you said earlier, Alex, who cares what their past was? We're talking about an event that occurred where one guy had an automatic rifle, another guy had a handgun. Okay, so what happens if Grosskreutz shoots and kills the other guy? I mean, are the tables going to be turned? Is it the exact same thing? And that's why, I mean, this has been one of those cases that it's really hard for me to sort out.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick and just say, I have tried to, and even people in my personal life have asked me, what's my opinion of this verdict, and I hesitate to even give one because, I don't know all the facts. I wasn't sitting watching every second of the trial, and so I really just point to them and say, you really need to make your own decision, but as far as pointing out the facts of this case, I think it all comes down to whether that first shooting, which I think was of Rosenbaum,
right?
If that was justified in self-defense, then I think the second and the third shootings are also justified, because the second and third shootings, there's no doubt Kyle is running from the crowd and he's being chased and pursued. And now if he's just murdered someone and he's being pursued, he gives up that right to self-defense. And so I think it really comes down to, was that first one justified? And I do know that there was some testimony, at least, that, maybe Kyle had pointed his gun at Rosenbaum, but for sure Rosenbaum had his hand on the barrel at some point trying to take the gun from Kyle. But so I think every person's got to draw their own conclusions from that. But as far as what you were saying about some of these witnesses hurting the prosecution, unfortunately, in our job, we as prosecutors, I try to explain it as, and because I tell all of my witnesses that testify for me this, I don't want you to go up there and say what you think will help the state's case. I want you to go up there and tell the truth. I want you to answer every question fully. You let the facts come out as they really happened, and we let the judge or the jury decide. And I'm sure that's what most prosecutors say. I tend to think is tell the truth, and we'll let the facts play out for the jury. I'm sure that's what happened here. And sometimes, unfortunately, you just have people that you got to put on the stand to make your case, and they might say something stupid. Like in this case, that Grosskreutz guy, if he hadn't taken the stand, then that third count of homicide they would have had to completely drop it. It would have been dismissed outright because there wouldn't have been any evidence. You had to have his testimony to make that charge. And yeah, most prosecutors just say, tell the truth and we'll see what happens. I think that's probably what they said with this guy. And unfortunately, he put his foot in his mouth.
Sean, what do you?
Yeah. I again, super well spoken, and I completely agree. I think with any case, and I'm sure that you deal with this on the daily at this point, there can always be that, whether it's the first part, the middle part, the ending part, there can always be that unknown. And again, it's up for the jurors to decide what they either, what side they want to take when it comes down to it in the end. Because again, you're right. if there was more video evidence, if there was more proof of what the, initial shot at Rosenbaum, why it happened and what started it, then that would actually would have given us a better picture of this case. But unfortunately, that was not the case. I don't know, how are you guys doing on time on your end?
We've got about 5 minutes. We're still good for about 5 minutes, Sean.
Yeah. I'm
Okay,
good.
cool. Just because we'll definitely have to save it as I would love to get your opinion, and we can get it at a later date on the NFL lawsuit, just because I am excited for tomorrow the 23rd.
Yep.
There should be some pretty sound movements in this case. I was actually on hold with the Pat McAfee show today, and then I got hung up on, and then I didn't have time to call back afterwards. But I was gonna talk more about the situation. But we could be looking at the city of St. Louis could be potentially collecting a settlement from Stan Kroenke of upwards of $750 million tomorrow. So if something like this is to happen, then Stan Kroenke will officially be leaving the NFL and the remaining 31 owners high and dry for the actual remaining lawsuit for unrightful relocation. So I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but what are you kind of hoping for, Alex? I'd love to kind of see what you're hoping for and what you kind of expect to come from this.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll say first off, the fact that Stan Kroenke, who is, in my opinion, one of the most vile human beings in the United States.
Yes, sir.
The fact, and first off, I will preface this is not my area of expertise. I'm a criminal prosecutor.
Hey, well, you got
what he did was a
going
crime.
after
What
Sting.
he did was a crime.
It was a
All
crime.
right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go
But
ahead.
The fact that he's already talking about $750 million, that means St. Louis has got a pretty damn good case, in my opinion. So personally, selfishly, I was a diehard Rams fan, fell in love with the team as a boy. Sad to see the Rams go. I have kind of sworn off the NFL. I have not taken up a new team since the Rams left. That said, if part of the settlement includes an expansion franchise, bring it on, because I think that's a much better long-term investment for the city. But if it's money, I mean, because it's going to be St. Louis City, St. Louis County sharing some of this, the Convention and Visitors Bureau. I mean, my opinion, take the damn thing to trial. You're for sure going to. There is no way the NFL walks out of this with paying nothing. Take it to trial, air all of the dirty laundry that those owners have, because, hey, if that's if you settle for, I don't know, let's say $5 billion, and you take it to a trial, and even things don't work out, and you only get $1 billion. Hearing all of the stuff that Jerry Jones and Robert Kraft,
Hunts and all them,
yes, all of that is worth that $4 billion or whatever it is, the difference ends up being. But no, the fact that Kroenke's willing to settle, that trouble is a brewing amongst those owners. They are all scared to death.
Well, that was, if you didn't get a chance to see that, Alex, I would recommend you watching when Sean was on the Pat McAfee show, because that was the very thing that they brought. I mean, they want to pay that and make that go away, because like Sean and I have discussed this at length on just chatting back and forth with each other, texting, how the NFL does not want this to see the light of day in court. They do not. Well, I mean, I would like to. I'm with you. I'm just like, I would just say, hey, let's just hear about, and I'm sure the NFL Players Association would love to hear about
that's the big part of it is the NFLPA. So and you might know a little bit more on this, Alex, but from what I've gathered from reading way too many articles about this, is that there's a unique Missouri law or rule. I'm not 100% because I can't find the actual body of language that this law allegedly is. But Missouri's unique where in court cases, the something along the lines of whoever is a defendant has to give up essentially have a proof of record of their net income, what they're making, what they own. Essentially, that's one of the big deals that's unique to Missouri, and other states don't have, where these owners have to prove their net worth. Was kind of what I've been getting the gist from a lot of some of the lawyers that I've been reading articles on and news reporters. Do you know anything about that?
So it's not so much that you have to prove your net worth in court, but at least in Missouri civil cases, your personal financial or even your business finances, those are discoverable. And by discoverable, I mean when the lawyers are investigating this case while it's pending, the city's lawyer has the right to go to Stan Kroenke and demand to see all of his financial information.
Correct.
In order to better prepare their case. It doesn't necessarily mean that all gets to come out in court, but it's discoverable, which means the city's going to find out
how much
what all skeletons Stan's got in his closet.
Him and everybody else then too, as far as that goes.
Yeah. Because the NFLPA is going to see exactly how much money these owners are truly making.
Yep.
Especially those ones, because those are the big boys that had money vested in Los Angeles. And and there's other things too, like Roger Goodell's ass will be to the flames, because I can't believe that John Gruden was the only one out of, what was it, like 650,000 emails out that only John Gruden was the only scumbag that decided to say what he said.
The sacrificial lamb.
I really do think that there's a lot more to come from this, and I know tomorrow is going to be a big day to see what the step is moving forward. But I do believe it's January 12th, I think, is the date that officially they're wanting that they will officially be kicking court off in St. Louis. And I ought to just go and get my season tickets to that, just like they did for the Battlehawks, because it'll be the most action that,
St. Louis
sports
has seen
that I
in a
care
while,
about
right?
In St. Louis.
Right.
Yeah. So what a day it would be if one year, 20 years down the road, we bring home the Super Bowl and the XFL championship all in the same year. I'd say St. Louis would make.
So I know we got to go, but here's my proposed settlement: expansion franchise, publicly owned, like the Packers.
Yep.
So we're not making some other family in St. Louis rich.
More money.
Mm-hmm. Yes, expansion franchise, publicly owned. The NFL pays for the stadium, and the NFL promises us a Super Bowl and a Pro Bowl within the first 5 years.
Nice.
As far as hosting, not being in, but hosting.
Someone get this man to that courtroom tomorrow.
Get Alex Ellison there now. Yes.
I love it. Well, we'll definitely have to have you back here in a couple of weeks once we kind of see what the verdicts and once more stuff starts rolling out. Alex, thank you so much for tonight,
you guys are very welcome.
I know you are a busy bee, being a dad and a loving husband and a great brother-in-law to my great friend Brad. So I appreciate all you do, especially for Pike County, doing your best to keep meth off the streets out there, which I know is can be quite the task, but I'd say if anyone's doing it well, it's
you are. Yes,
you,
sir.
So.
We do want to thank Alex. Thank you so much for coming on, spending an hour and some minutes with us tonight, and yes, we are going to have you back on again. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. It was a lot of fun, guys.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, To all of our listeners, again, thank you all so much for joining us live. Thank you, guys. We're actually up to, I saw at one point, like 18
Yes.
were viewing at one time with us tonight. So
we did have 19. 19 is what I had.
Nice. So again, thank you guys for checking us out right here on Facebook Live. Make sure you guys check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, wherever you do get your podcast viewing in. Please make sure you check us out, like, share, subscribe on all those different platforms, and make sure you tell a friend, be a friend, and get the word out. We are slowly but surely growing, and we're going to have a pretty rocking year in 2022. So get the ball rolling now. Let your friends know now so they can ride the wave right into the new year with us.